Hello, I am Lauren Chater, and I am the author of The Lace Weaver. Was my first book, Gulliver's Wife, which came out at the start of the pandemic in 2020. And I'm here to talk to you tonight about my brand new book, The Winter Dress. It's very exciting to be here, actually, because when Gulliver's Wife came out, all of my events were cancelled, as everything was at the very start of the pandemic in March 2020. And one of the first events, one of the only events that I was able to do at that time was a Facebook live launch with Better Reading. And so it feels really kind of like a big, nice circle to be back here again and speaking to you lovely people. And I'm very grateful to you for joining us. And please feel free to comment in the chat and let me know where you're from. And I'd love to have your questions. I'm just going to talk about the new book for a little while and give you a little bit of backstory and why I chose to write the book. And then hopefully you'll have some questions for me that I can answer and we can have a nice cozy chat together. I hope that you've brought a drink with you. Or even a cup of tea, which is what I brought, because it's 8 o'clock on a school night and my kids have just gone back to school. Yay! So let's get started. So The Winter Dress. The Winter Dress tells the story of Jo Baker, who is a textiles historian. She was raised on a little island called Texel in North Holland. So she's Dutch, but a terrible sort of tragedy when she's a teenager that occurs when she's a teenager forces her to Australia, where she moves to live with her aunt Marique. Excuse me. And Jo is haunted by her past, but she is actually connected to the 17th century by the discovery of this extraordinary silk dress. So one of her friends, Bram, leads a dive group, and he discovers this extraordinary dress in a shipwreck, and he calls Jo to ask her for help tracking down who might have worn this dress and what the story might be behind it. And the other story that runs alongside Jo's narrative is that of Anna Tessel. Anna is a 17th century laundress who she's actually a merchant's daughter who was sort of fallen on hard times and living in the Dutch Golden Age, which of course, as we know, was not so golden for everyone. Anna has a sister and is tragically ends up orphaned and becomes the ladies' companion to a very famous Dutch artist, Catharina van Schuurman, and goes to live with Catharina at her house with Catharina's brother as well. And so the dress that is the feature of the story and that connects Jo and Anna is this beautiful sort of creamy gold-coloured dress that belonged to Anna's mother. And the dress is sort of a talisman and a touchstone for Anna. Whenever she puts it on, she feels like more confident, and it connects her to her past. And so the dress is what really connects Jo and Anna through time. And as Jo unravels the mystery of the dress and what happened to Anna and her fate, she learns about herself and has to confront these unpalatable truths about her past and her heritage. And she's never actually returned to Texel, so being drawn back there by this amazing dress and sort of haunted by the mystery of who wore it, it's the first time that she's gone back. So it's a story about ghosts and secrets and clothing, obviously, and how the clothes that our ancestors wore, teach us about how they lived and how they died, but also their hopes and dreams and what might have really happened to them. and I really hope that people are enjoying reading it. I did a lot of research for this book. Obviously, I was very lucky to do the research before COVID hit, so in 2019, because this book is actually based on a true story. So it's based on the story of the Palmwood wreck dress, it's called. I first read about this dress in the New Yorker. So there was an article published in the New Yorker called "The Extraordinary Finds of a Dutch Amateur Diving Club," and one of the amazing things that these Dutch divers found inside this shipwreck off Texel was this amazing dress. And I'm going to hold up a picture for you to see. And this is what the real dress looks like. I'm just trying to get it out of the light so that you can see the color of it. It really is an extraordinary artifact. So this dress is 400 years old, estimated to be around 400 years old. The color is a bit redder than it would normally look, but they think that it might have rubbed up against a mantle, a red cloak, and that's why it's sort of discolored. But actually, it's in amazing condition. And so when the divers found this dress, they hosed it down and they hung it up inside their bathroom of their clubhouse, because they didn't realize that it was this precious artifact. And the director of the museum on the island came to a barbecue that they were hosting, and she saw the dress and immediately knew that it was an extraordinary find and one of the greatest sort of maritime discoveries of all time, because historically textiles don't survive in water for more than a month, kind of thing. There are no examples of a dress like this surviving. There were other artifacts discovered in the wreck, including a lice comb, which you can see here, a little wooden lice comb, and also a velvet purse, which has this beautiful kind of embroidery on it. There were also fragments of carpet and palm wood, which is a special kind of resin, which is why it ended up with the name the Palmwood wreck. And so when I saw the picture of this dress and read about it, I immediately knew that I wanted to write the story of both the discovery of the dress, a fictionalized version to protect identities and be able to explore the themes and the things about the story that I wanted to explore, and to run alongside it the story of who had worn the dress, and just sort of map out maybe what that woman's fate had been, and to understand, I suppose, a little bit more about what life would have been like for women in 17th century Holland. So I'm just going to check our comments and say hello. Hello, Jessie. Hi, Donna. Hi, Suzanne. So nice to see you here. Hi, Judy, and hi, Elizabeth. Yes, who else would like to take that velvet purse out on the ton? I would love to take that purse out. Hi, Ilona. It's lovely to see you. Hi, Wendy. Oh my gosh, there's so many people here. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Renee. It's lovely to have you in the chat. So if you have any questions, why did the dress survive? So the dress survived, they think, because it was sandwiched in mud. So there was no possibility of oxygen getting in and starting the deterioration process. So as soon as the dress was brought up by the divers, that process began, and it will actually be gone. So at the moment, it's being stored in an archaeological facility on Castricum, which is on the mainland in Holland, and they've built a special little box for it that keeps out, bugs and pests and all sorts of nasty things that can chew through fabric. But even with the best of care, this dress will be gone in sort of 50 years time. So they're going to display it in July this year, and you'll be able to go to Texel and see it for the first time since it was discovered. Hello, Lynette. Wendy says, do you have a particular interest in antique textiles? I do, actually. I love textiles, and it's only, I guess, since writing this third book that I realized why I find it so fascinating. And it is because, textiles are connected to the history of mankind and they sort of markers for the start of civilization, really, because people that how many thousands of years ago they were weaving flax to keep themselves warm and keep themselves from freezing to death. So we can tell a lot about those ancient civilizations by the kind of clothes that they wore, the kind of textiles that they wore. Of course, as well, clothes are markers of status and class. They tell us about, the kind of how much money people had, what they valued. Clothes were extremely expensive, obviously, and silk particularly was very luxurious, and still is, of course. There's always a sort of a dark underside to any of these sort of creations, with the silkworms are always cooked alive so that they can the silk can be unraveled. Or we have this silk now called peace silk, which is where the silkworms don't have to be killed in order to make that gorgeous lustrous kind of fabric. But yes, so that's hence why it's so valuable, why silk is so valuable. Julie would like to know, did you see the dress? I did see the dress. I saw the dress in 2019 when I went to Holland. I didn't know if I was actually going to get to see the dress because it was a bit disorganized. I couldn't really ask in advance because they didn't know who I was until I got there and, it was a real person, not just an email or a person behind the screen. And so the lovely museum director, Karina, she had organized with the archaeological facility for me to show up there, and I turned up and they didn't really want to show it to because they didn't really know who I was. But they kept calling me the Australian journalist, and they kept saying the Australian journalist would like to see the dress. And I said, yes, the Australian journalist would like to see the dress. Didn't disabuse them of that title because I thought it's really, it's going to get my foot in the door, and they didn't want to disappoint me. So they showed it to me. They took me down to the basement, and it was just there. It was freezing down there because obviously they want to keep the temperature cold so that, that it doesn't overheat and things don't grow. But it was in a beautiful big white archival box, and he took the lid off, and it was just there in this tissue paper, this extraordinary 400-year-old dress. And I have heard people describe the experience as being very surreal, and certainly that was the case for me. This dress looked like a kind of time traveler. It had witnessed all these amazing things, and it had survived all these years at the bottom of the ocean. And so I felt very moved by the dress. And it's also a very intimate item. It was worn against someone's skin. That person's body is no longer here, but that dress is a relic. It's a it says I was here despite all the hardships that person probably went through. So yes, I did see the dress, and it was definitely an amazing experience. Oh, thank you. I enjoy Gulliver's Wife and look forward to hope you enjoy it. Are your books a series or a one-off? Lynette would like to know. They're always one-offs at this stage. I just find it really interesting to immerse myself in different time periods and different kind of settings, and I love creating new characters and getting stuck into the nitty-gritty research of a particular time and place. A lot of my books are set in the 17th century. I just find it a really interesting time period, I guess. There was a lot happening at that time politically in Europe. There were a lot of wars going on or starting or ending. There was a lot of crossover in Europe between royalty. They moved around a lot. And certainly in The Winter Dress, one of the interesting things that Anna finds when she moves to The Hague, which is where Katharina lives, is that there were 3 courts operating at The Hague, including the court of the Winter Queen, who was one of the Stuarts. Her brother, Charles Stuart, was the monarch, the King of England during the Civil War, who had his head cut off by Oliver Cromwell's cronies. And so the Winter Queen was given that title because she and her husband sort of had this poisoned chalice, drank from this poisoned chalice. They were given this kingdom, this Palatine, and then there was an uprising, and so she only reigned for one season. And so the interesting thing about her is that she had a court in exile. And so she was, despite all her riches and her status, was a woman who, who still had to endure a lot of hardships and spent her whole life being isolated from her family in England and could never return. And so this idea of being in exile is a sort of theme that haunts the story as well, because Jo is in exile and Anna is in this sort of self-imposed exile, in that she's sort of afraid to move forward because her father gave her this sort of cursed name, Anna Tessel. Tessel Shard is the longer form of her name, and the reason that he gave her this name is because he had as a merchant, he had a few ships that were in an anchorage in Texel, and one of these great storms came through. Texel is known for its storms, sank his ships, and so on the night that Anna is born in the 1500s, her father gives her the name Anna Tesselshard, which means damage on Texel, and it's basically a reminder to her that worldly wealth can be snatched away at any moment, and that only God's kind of glory is the only thing sort of worth investing in. So Anna sort of suffers from this terrible curse and thinks that she's cursed her family and that she's sort of a poison or toxic to her family. So it's her job to kind of get over that. I'm just looking at some of these questions. Have you seen the Gabrielle Chanel Fashion Manifesto? No, I haven't. Some of those garments are nearly 100 years old. Oh, I bet there are lots of stories associated with Chanel's dresses as well. Amazing. I remember seeing the Dior exhibition a few years ago in Melbourne. That was just extraordinary, and just walking around thinking, oh, can you imagine all the stories that these clothes would be able to tell, and certainly about the post-war, and just fascinating stories about the characters that would have worn them, I suppose. Jessie would like to know, what do you love about writing historical fiction? I just adore historical fiction. I love reading it. To me, it's a way of connecting the past with the present. And sometimes I feel like we need that kind of hindsight to be able to examine what choices were made and what impact those choices had on society, and what role sort of we all played in this sort of great tapestry of life. I think the best example of that obviously has been the last couple of years, when we've been through this extraordinary journey together, not always pleasant, of a pandemic. It's really shaped our lives in so many ways, and changed the direction of a lot of people's lives. I was in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, and I know that like everyone I talk to is still suffering from this kind of grief and this trauma of being in lockdown, and so not being able to see their families. And I just think this is going to take years and years for us to understand the impact of that. So writing things like historical fiction, we're able to look back at those big events in time and see how they impacted not only big populations and a big political scale, but also the lives of everyday people just like us. Just my era. Do you find it, Elizabeth would like to know, did you find it easier or more fun to write modern Jo or 17th century Anna? That's a really good question. I definitely found it more challenging to write the contemporary sections of the book, and I think for all the reasons that I just described to you, it's actually very hard to write about the time that you're living in, because you kind of think that people are going to take things for granted, but you do have to still put yourself in the shoes of your character and think, what does that character know? And it's kind of hard sometimes to separate you as a modern person from that modern character. So that was a challenge for me, and I definitely feel a lot more comfortable just writing straight historical fiction, but I think that it's given me a bit of a taste for writing both, and so I'm not sure that I'll be able to give that. I think I might have to work that into sort of future books as well. Were any of the characters written from real people or put into a situation? Wendy would like to know. So they are, quite a few of the characters are based on real people. Katharina, the artist, the 17th century artist that Anna goes to live with, is based on a real woman called Anna Maria van Sherman. Anna Maria was an extraordinary artist. She was a miniaturist, an engraver. She spoke 14 different languages. She was a polymath. And we don't hear about her. So she was born in the 17th century to Dutch parents. She was raised alongside her brothers and was taught Latin. Her father unusually allowed her to be educated, but she just excelled at everything that she tried. She was like a true Renaissance woman, and she, when you see the when you see the self-portraits of her, you can see that there's this sparkle in her eye, this glint in her eye, and she knew exactly what she was doing. She's very self-confident, very self-assured. She was actually the first woman to go to university in the Netherlands, and she had to sit behind a screen so that she didn't make the male students feel uncomfortable. And they also gave her a name, the Star of Utrecht. So they called her the Star of Utrecht, or the North Star. So that was Anna Maria van Sherman, and she lived an amazing life, never married, just would tell everybody that she was married to her pen, which I fully respect. And I think that's also what sort of set her apart, because for a woman of her status, not to marry would have been very unusual. But Anna Maria didn't think that she needed a man in her life. You've already sold it. Oh, that's very sweet. How fascinating that the dress survived. Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, it is amazing, really extraordinary. And I hope that people will one day be able to go and see it when the borders are open again and it's easy for us to travel and not too expensive, because it is worth seeing. It is a truly amazing experience. Do you have a favorite historical period? Yes. Well, the 17th century is definitely my favorite period to write in. My next book will also be set in the 17th century. So it's called The Beauties, and I'm working on it now. It's basically about a series of paintings, portraits that were done in the 17th century, painted by Peter Lely, who was the court artist at the Restoration Court, the court of King Charles II, the merry monarch, as you know, he was the naughty monarch. But he spent years sort of he was in exile and traveling around, and eventually, you know, had his throne, was restored to the throne, and so was quite sort of mentally damaged by that. But these portraits were painted of his mistresses, and they were the most beautiful women at court. So they were all vying for all competing for the prize of being the most, of being in this series of portraits, of paintings. And so there's 11 paintings, and one of them is missing. We know that there were 11 painted, but we're not sure who was who sat for the last one. So my story is actually about a fictional character called Amelia Lennox, and she comes to court, and she's a famed beauty, comes to court to beg the king for to restore her husband's fortunes, because his family chose the wrong side during the Civil War. And the king agrees to do this for her, but only if she will become his mistress as well. And Amelia says that she will become his mistress, but only after her portrait is painted in this series of the Windsor Beauties. And so she gets, there's her story is sort of conflicted with the story of the artist's apprentice, whose name is Henry, and he is sort of a womanizer and a drinker, and his job is to sort of restore his master's faith in his art and to become, the next court artist. And so his job is to paint Amelia. So the two of them will clash, and that's where the story sort of starts. But also it's the story of the paintings of the women themselves, the mistresses themselves, and it's about women who have to use their beauty as currency in a patriarchal time when, you could go to bed and end up and contract smallpox and be completely transformed the next day, and your beauty just snatched away from you. And with it, all your worldly wealth and your entitlements and things like that. So, so I'm really looking forward to writing that. Corey says, your story about the portrait sounds amazing. How do you get your initial ideas or the spark for a book? This particular idea for the beauties came from reading an article in Atlas Obscura, which is a really amazing website that I highly recommend. It's got all sorts of funny things on it. I mean, you could write novels. Many of those articles could inspire novels. So usually when I get an idea, I'll read something and then I'll connect it with something else. So at that time that I was thinking about writing about these series of portraits, I was also read an article about Emily Ratajkowski, the amazingly gorgeous supermodel who was in that very infamous Blurred Lines film clip a couple of years ago. And I had just dismissed Emily as a sort of a bimbo airhead, like as you do, and I have these internal biases against extraordinarily beautiful women, like so many people do. But she was actually very erudite and very able to speak about her experiences of being a supermodel and how, you know, how difficult it is to reconcile this idea of selling your beauty and selling your image to these powerful men in order to be successful, how those kind of negotiations are made inside your head all the time, and how difficult it is actually to live with yourself, you know. And so I just found that really fascinating and wanted to work that into this story of these 17th century paintings. So the paintings will have their own voice as well, kind of like a Greek chorus, which will echo down through time and will connect sort of modern time readers with the past, with the stories of the past. Oh, thank you. I need to read it. Thank you. How much time do you set aside to research for each novel? Melissa would like to know. So I usually set aside about 6 months to do the initial kind of reading of the research books. I also love visiting galleries. I will always visit the places that I'm writing about because I think it's really important, you know, especially for things like folklore and interesting little stories that you have to be open to hearing those, to finding those ideas as you travel and research. One of the interesting kind of things that I learned about when I was writing The Winter Dress was we were traveling through a little town, I suppose it's called Emmerdorp, and it's in South Holland. And there's a place nearby called the Drunken Land, and it means the drowned land. It was basically, it's a swamp. It's where the sea rushes in, and it's actually very dangerous because people get caught in the marsh there and they can drown. And so I've tied it into the story of Joe's parents and their sort of tragedy in The Winter Dress. But there's a folk tale about the town, and that town no longer exists. And the reason why is because in the 1400s or 1500s, there was a great flood. So that somebody in the town did something bad, offended God. This is how the stories always go. And so he flooded the land and everyone in the town drowned. And so there's this sort of ghost story that at night you can still hear the church bell, village bell ringing under the water, so under the in the mud, sort of calling people for help. So I just love those kind of stories, and those are the kind of things that you can't actually read about. You know, you can't connect them unless you're in that particular place at that particular time. So I think it's always really important to go if you can. Oh, thank you. That's so nice. Oh, would like to access the website you mentioned. It's called Atlas Obscura. So Atlas, ATLAS, and Obscura, like obscure, but with an A at the end. It's really good. And they've actually published a couple of books, which I have as well. So no shortage of ideas there. Oh, that's very nice. Thank you, Jenny. Gulliver's Wife is so amazing. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Iola would like to know, have you ever considered including a fantasy element in a future book? Well, actually, I would love to write, so the book that I would love to write after The Beauties would be about the Macbeth witches, who are the Weird Sisters, as you probably know. And I would love to write a kind of witchy, superstitious story with maybe some fantasy elements, but you just don't know whether it's really you know, it's really fantasy, or is it folklore, or is it true, about the three sisters as they're growing up. And it will be about, you know, sisterhood and magic and fate. And I think that definitely, you know, one of the sisters has to have been in love with Macbeth, and the younger sister will be the one that's trying to change the fate, the future fate of their kingdom. So yeah, hopefully that sounds like really fun to me. Oh, thank you, Wendy. You have such enthusiasm. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. That's very kind of you. I'm just scrolling up to see if there's any other questions that I have missed. That's lovely. New comments. Do you have a new story in the pipeline? Oh, good. I'm glad I answered that. Whoop, I've lost you. Thank you. That's so kind. I would tell you a little bit about more about the writing process. So it actually took 2 years, because people always want to know this, and then I'll just wrap up and say good night. So it took 2 years from the beginning of starting the research of the story until finally finishing it. It was an incredibly difficult book to write because I wrote it in lockdown. We had 2 lockdowns, obviously, and I was, I think in the first lockdown I was in the drafting stage, and the second lockdown I was in the editing stage. So I am extremely proud of it, and I do hope that you will enjoy reading it. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining me tonight, and hopefully I'll see you around next time at the next one, and hopefully things will be even more positive than they are now. Thank you. Good night.